That's 296-5467. Or email us at themikebuckshow@gmail.com. Now, back to Mike on 690, The Answer.
You're listening to The Mike Buck Show.
Oh, yeah, the heat is on. The heat is on the Big Square building. It's time to do serious triage, clean up, and find out what's left. And we're going to do that. Beth Fukumoto Chang in the house on Legislative Monday morning, and so is the surf. I saw a guy signed hopeful at the gas station this morning getting my coffee at Hawaii Chevron, and he was strapped on, and it was like dark, and he was dawn patrolling, and it was windy, and it was cold, and it was lousy. But he said, and he reminded me of this, and Charlie Garrett said this before too, the worst day surfing is better than the best day working. Right, Charlie? And last week when we were talking to Beth Fukumoto Chang, we were talking about the importance of things happening, and Thursday was the day, and a lot of things did happen. But then I was thinking over the weekend, wait a minute, that doesn't mean the party's over. The party's not over at all. As a matter of fact, the real infighting begins now with what is left. I'm not talking about table scraps, right, Beth? I'm talking about really good stuff. Good morning.
Good morning.
How was the traffic? Pretty good. You made it.
Not too bad, yeah.
Not too bad.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, not too bad.
Was it raining?
It wasn't raining, but I had my sister this morning, so my sister was driving with me, so I got to
carpool. You got to carpool again. There you go. Get that lane in. There were guys that were buying mannequins when stores went out of business for that, but it didn't work. After a while, they started figuring them out. The guy's been sitting there with the newspaper in his hand for a month. Okay. Anyway, the one thing that was mentioned in the paper this morning, which I didn't know much about, is this bill that's called Marsy's Law. Mm-hmm. What's the story?
It's basically a crime victim rights law, and I actually know somebody personally that is a friend of my family that's advocating for this bill, and he had gotten stabbed up hiking, and the perpetrator was
this the guy in Diamond Head?
No. Yeah, he was concerned that
you can get stabbed no matter where you're hiking.
Right. It was one of those kinds of situations, though, and wasn't notified that the perpetrator had been released. So similar, that's basically where this law comes from. It's giving victims an opportunity to know that the person that probably committed the crime against them is back on the streets.
And so I do know that a lot of these things are well intended, but the problem is that they're pretty finite too, right? So before somebody signs on or off about them, you have to say, okay, on the surface, this always looks like a good thing.
Sure.
I mean, it seems like victims will tell you, hey, the bad guys get all the rights, we get nothing.
Right, and that's what they've said. And the problem is, so it's a victims' rights bill. The problem is that we're talking about people that haven't been actually convicted yet. So whether or not we should, it's sort of assuming they're guilty, and that's kind of not what we're supposed to do. So there are some problems with the bill, but we've been moving it forward, and it's passed out of both the House and the Senate now. So.
Okay, one of the things that's sort of interesting, and I know this ties into this, a lot of times families or victims feel like, wait a minute, if you're incarcerating this person, and how am I going to get relief? If I want to sue this guy civilly for the pain you're taking away his ability to earn an income. So there's pressure on the judiciary, right?
Right.
I mean, when you consider, like, how severe was this guy's crime, and is this guy better off staying in society and trying to pay back?
Yeah, and that's only if we can get some sort of a restitution, right? And that doesn't always happen. But I think a lot of if it's something like a violent crime, most people, no amount of money is going to fix that. They'd rather just make sure the person's off the streets.
Well, let's talk about that really briefly, because in the next segment, when I have Scott Spallina in here, we're going to talk about there's some controversy going on now about Judge Stephen Ahm's HOPE program, particularly because of what happened at Coquille Park Terrace.
Yeah.
Where this guy was like, and I know that you guys and gals in the ledge, you see this all the time. When people come up for or against something, they bring you some pretty alarming stuff about who's out there on the streets, right?
Yes, and it's usually the worst of the worst. Right? The story people always tell you when they testify is the worst case scenario. But there are some bad stories.
Well, particularly if you have a zillion arrests. Arrests don't mean anything.
Right.
Like you said, if this Marsy's Law is predicated on somebody being arrested, not convicted, that's a slippery slope, right?
Right. Right.
Oh, boy. Okay. Anyway, it's 12 minutes after the hour. If you want to chat with Beth, it is easy. 296-KHNR is the number. That's 296-5467. We'll also tell you how you can reach her office with a comment or help before. So so the Marsy's law, I guess because of its prominence, came out the best of it. But what are some of the other things that you think are important to look at now that they've apparently made it or going forward?
Mm-hmm. One of the interesting ones I thought, we had a few that were relating to the police. I know you guys had been talking earlier about this DUI case.
Yeah,
we haven't talked about a DUI case, but we've talked about police training boards, different types of ethics things that we could work on to try to basically make HPD keep a better eye on HPD. Yeah. Let's put it that way. But one of the bills that I thought that was crime related, it was particularly interesting, was whether or not people could. It was setting guidelines for how you can film police doing police work, and firemen doing fireman work. And
because everybody's an expert now, right, with their cell phone,
right? And my first reaction was, no, this is it's freedom. You're on the street, it's in the public, you should be able to film anything. I mean, that's always been my theory, because I think freedom of information is really important. But we have a couple of colleagues in my caucus whose spouses are in law enforcement, and both of them raise concerns that people are regularly getting in the way of the police doing their jobs.
I'm concerned more than that people are more concerned about getting the video than they are calling 911. Yes. They'll yell to somebody else to do it, and they're using their phone, which could have been used to do that.
Useless
yeah,
right now.
Exactly. So they've taken away the phone part and they're doing the shooting. Right. But there's also another thing, and this must be difficult because I know that you're all hearing this when the backlash comes from enforcement, saying, "Hey, wait a minute. Things aren't always like they look on these little herky jerky sound bites with video."
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they raised a number of really good concerns. It's a measure moving forward. I don't know that it's going to pass, and it was one of those where my first reaction was, "Oh, this is a great idea. People should be able to do whatever they want, film whatever they want in the public." And then other people started talking, and I thought, "Oh, okay." So the lesson there is that we can always be swayed.
I want to tell you something. It's refreshing to hear somebody in your generation using something out of my generation when discussing it, when you say something being filmed. There hasn't been film used for decades.
That's true.
We're talking about somebody is recording, digitally recording something. But it is kind of true. And I remember before, and I know that this has come up a few times. It's always gotten kickback. Whether it's come up in Hawaii recently, I don't know. But that was the admissibility or inadmissibility of a lie detector test, a polygraph test.
Yeah. Because
of the uncertainty of the equipment. Mm-hmm. There's no longer uncertainty about the equipment. It knows when you're telling a lie.
Right.
But isn't it the same thing about video? That there's the video that you take with the cell phone won't necessarily be accepted into. It may not pass muster as to what it is as far as it being evidence.
Right, and the danger of sort of polluting a jury pool, and if somebody can edit the film, there were all sorts of things that came up when we started talking about it. But I think that's why it's so important to talk to your legislators at any point in the game, right? We're about to pass this bill, and I started to change my mind on it because other people were giving me different ideas.
Yeah, interesting. We got plenty more to discuss, including your opportunity to join us. We're going to talk about some more specific bills, and more importantly, we're even going to talk about. It was kind of a down season. I'm going to get Beth to admit that, because an election year usually is. However, there were some things that, as contentious as they might have seemed, still got processed because they needed to be. It was sort of the right thing to do. 16 minutes after the hour on The Answer with Malin Warren.
296-5467. That's 296 KHNR. It's the home of Hawaii's award-winning Mike Box Show on 690. The Answer.
Tax burden in the country is in New York, and the second highest is in Hawaii. We're taking a look right now at a Fox News survey. Alaska is way down. The lowest tax burden is Alaska. Now, they're the 49th state, even though when I was a kid, we used to have the 49th state fair. Well, we missed it by one state. So what does that tell you? Well, it tells you that those of us that live here, Beth, put up with an awful lot to live in paradise.
Yes.
They say the price you pay to live in paradise.
Yes.
Everything is connected to income. And I do know that it must pale the administration and the ledge to know that there's so many things you all want to do, and there's not enough nickels in the bucket to do it.
It is. It's frustrating. I think one of the most frustrating things is when I have colleagues just say that, if we just put more money towards this, we could fix it. We have to fund this fully or whatever it is. That's not always an answer.
There was one interesting thing that came up, and I knew it was with everybody's really looking into this to see if it really can be true. There's going to be millions and millions of dollars of improvements made to the airport in Maui.
Yeah.
And they figured out a way, I guess, to charge rent-a-cars or somebody else to pay for it. And the big question came up, well, gee, if we're spending all of these millions on Maui, what about Honolulu?
Right. And we were supposed to have a rental car facility created in Honolulu, too. And I think they are working on that. But, we're doing a lot of capital improvement projects across the state. Some of them are, I think, really important, and others,
But here's the kicker. What turns out to be very interesting, and there's any number of reasons for it, on any given day, there's way more rental cars in use on Maui than there are on Oahu.
Oh, that is interesting.
So that, it just tells you that here on Oahu, with buses and taxis and all of this stuff, people don't individualize their Oahu experiences much.
That would make sense. You can just go to Waikiki, but...
Yeah. Okay, let's go to the telephone. We'd love to talk to you, and particularly if it's in the wheelhouse of what's still on the legislative plate. What Beth refers to as the mixed plate of legislating every day. Glenn is in Kalihi with a question for you, Beth. Good morning, Glenn.
Good morning, Glenn.
Glenn, good morning. Can you hear us? Okay. Whoops. Rafael, did I take care of Glenn or you did? Oh, I see. You're doing them. Glenn, do we have you on this one?
Okay.
Hi, Glenn.
Hi. The Senate Bill 2938, the one to increase car registration and gas taxes.
Yeah.
I heard that Mike McCartney, the chief of staff of the governor, wanted to resurrect that bill at the last moment. Is that right?
I've heard the same thing, but he never personally asked me to do that, so I couldn't tell you for sure, but I have heard the same thing. Yeah.
Could you let us know if they try to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I really don't expect that to happen. I think people are going to be really angry if we do. So I think if we were going to pass it, we would have passed it already. To be honest, I just don't think that's going to happen. But certainly it's something I'm looking out for.
Yeah, and Glenn, I'm really glad you brought that up because that's going to be one of my next questions was going to be, there are any number of ways, some of them are kind of, a little bit, I want to say sneaky, that bring stuff in on the 11th hour. Is that what you're worried about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The last question is, I heard that the next year's safety check is going to cost $75. Could you find out about that?
Sure, I can check.
I'm just sitting here thinking I'm selling the car. I'm not going to do it. It's not worth $75. Glenn, that's a great question. Thanks very much.
Check.
Yeah, if you know anything about it. See, now, look, I do know there's another thing. We seem to want to blame everything on taxes and everything, but there are certain that really bear that. One of them is something that we use every single day, whether it's a carton of milk or a dozen eggs. There's always been a lot of pressure, and I know it came up again this year and then went away, to not have the GE tax on food. Yes. I mean, what a way to help people out, right? But isn't that an awful lot of money? And if you did that to be nice, where are you going to get the money?
Yeah, no, that's that's a huge chunk. I think we thought it was something like $50 million. So that's a lot of money to suddenly have to find.
Yeah. And I'm not sure that people understand, particularly when you look at the size of the budget that we have now in the billions of dollars.
Yeah.
When there's only a million plus of us, how much more can we take?
Yeah, there's not a whole lot more that we can do, right? I mean, well, hopefully there isn't.
Now, would you explain that what Glenn was talking about there was people that try to revive stuff?
Yeah.
Obviously, they can't revive it in its same form because it was out.
Right.
How do they reintroduce? You explained this to me last year. It went right above my pay grade, right?
Yeah.
Explain how this stuff works.
Okay, so this is important. The moment that we are in the legislative session right now, we finished all of our committee hearings. So all opportunity for public testimony officially is gone.
Right.
So now it's unofficial. It's emails, it's calling your legislators. That's the only way to stop something now. Once we go into conference, it's when the House and the Senate meets, and they can float any draft of any bill they want. They can come up with a whole new draft of a bill if they want to. So if we have something that says relating to taxes somewhere, they can replace all the contents of that bill and put something in there that says we're going to increase car registration taxes or weight taxes and gas taxes. They could do that. It's usually controversial when they do. So I don't expect something that was going to be controversial anyway to then on top of that a terrible process.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, though. I think this is important. Some people will go say to a conference meeting and say, look, my constituents have responded. I have 371 fors and 21 against.
Yeah.
Does anybody ever substantiate that? In other words, when you get communication into Beth Fukumoto's office, does somebody keep track of it?
Yes. And we do a survey. So on top of actually waiting to see what people say, I actually reach out to the community to try to get an idea of where people are on certain issues. Shouldn't
that be, I don't want to say mandatory, but shouldn't it be sort of, if let's say that somebody is either for or against something, couldn't they feasibly use as a weapon in their favor by saying, look, my district, that's what they want, look. And that may or may not be what the district really said. In other words, you got to take a look at the source, right?
Right.
What are your sources? Is it email? Is it? I mean, how do you weigh that stuff? And more importantly, how's it recorded?
Email, phone calls, and then I actually have a mail survey that I mail out to everybody, and then they have to return it. So that's I think that's the most credible because we get maybe about 1,000 responses, which is a decent sample
good, right?
size. Yeah. So I find that to be probably the most useful, and then we just keep an Excel spreadsheet to keep an eye on the issues. Yeah.
Is that something that you readily would say at the caucus level, share with each other? Say, I mean, because to go forward as a minority, you must have to be able to say, hey, look, at least in our districts where we've been elected, that's what people are saying.
Right, and we've actually tried to. We have one set of us that's all shared district lines, right? So Republicans are sort of spread out across the state or across Oahu, but Representative Pu'uha and Representative Matsumoto and I have contiguous districts. So we all did
contiguous meaning right next to each other.
Right next to each other. So we all did the same survey so that we could have an idea if it's just a central Oahu thing or, so it was useful this year to be able to see other people's responses.
Now that we are speaking about getting towards the short end of the deal, there's been a tremendous amount of publicity in the last week on the current status of HART, of the rail in general. There seems to be more city observations being expanded, but what about you guys? I mean, the ledge is at the deep pocket. If something goes wrong, is it of concern that that Don Horner's resigned and that Grabowskis looks like being on the edge of something happening to him too? Who's going to drive the bus? Excuse the expression, the train.
I think well. First of all, I'm glad that there's a little bit more attention and being paid to the HART board and to how it's being run because the cost overruns, and we know some of the reasons why there have been cost overruns, but at the end of the day, it's up to the city to manage this well. So if people are paying better attention, good, because we're spending a lot of money on this thing.
Well, the thing that always has been said, look, you said something earlier. A lot of your peers will say, "Hey, look, we can fix this. Just fund it. Throw money at it. It's going to work."
Right. And we can't just keep funding the rail in these huge deficits without actually looking and figuring out why.
But here's the thing that is a concern, and I don't know how this is going to play out, but is by getting rid of these people, cutting off the heads of the chicken, now you got the chickens running around. Who in the world is going to – first of all, nobody is saying abandon the project because that's not going to happen. But it's got to be –
right.
I mean, I can see a lot of things, but I can't see that thing being abandoned. And just hanging out there like Stonehenge in the sun.
Right.
Something's going to happen with it.
Right. Something will happen, and they have some people. I think there have been enough people watching and involved in this process that they have people they can bring up to run it. But I think the public might want to see some heads roll, so to speak. At this point.
That, it's always been along. Since Frank Fossey promised it at $1.5 billion.
Right.
Now it's up to who knows what billion.
Right. And the public wants to see some accountability.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about that and more when we come back after the bottom of the hour news break. Beth Fukumoto Chang, minority in the House. Excuse me.
5467. Here's more Mike Buck on 690. The Answer.
And it says call me. It's not really call me. It's call Beth and me at 296-KHNR. That's 296-5467. Talking about a bunch of things, sort of interesting as we sort of ramp up. And it's just dawned on me, and we talked with Beth Fukumoto Chang the other day about her running for re-election, and I think people need to be reminded that the entire House of Representatives is up for grabs this year.
Nobody. 2 years. Yep.
Yeah, and that only happens. That didn't happen every time, does it?
That we're all up for re-election. In the House, it is every 2 years we're all up.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
So
it's rough.
yeah, it is, and it's interesting because I know that a lot of times there's strategy.
Yeah.
In when they file and everything else, but I would imagine if an incumbent lets people know that they want to be reelected, they better do it pretty early.
Yeah, no, you definitely don't want rumors. I know there had been rumors that I was going to run for city council earlier this year, so I pulled my papers and filed early because you got to stop the rumors. Otherwise, people start to think about running against you. It is unique in Hawaii, isn't it? That first of all, our state is so small, and we are rubbing elbows with county and state every single day. Oh yeah,
it is way more common for people here to go and do that.
Yeah.
For instance, remember when Kim Pine, decided not to be a rep anymore, to be a council person. I guess it just depends on where your heart is or what your priorities are. Yeah, I think, there are a variety of factors, but city issues to me are sometimes a little bit less interesting. We'll see. Maybe I'll decide, I'm tired of state politics. One of the things that I know is, and you know what, a lot of people have that, right? Mm-hmm. And they just say, you know what, I just want to go back to my burbs and I want to take care of my area. Right. I want my parks, my streets, my neighbors. Right. The interesting thing about that is it comes once again when we're trying and parse out the importance of the legislation that still exists, where the counties are trying to get more, and they won't give up on the TAT. Mm-hmm. Is that dead for now in your mind? No, it's not. The counties, we're still looking at bills. We looked at one on Tuesday to take more of the county's share of the TAT, or to give them more, depending on which county we were looking at. So it's still very much in the discussion. Maybe people need to be explained. The primary sources of income for the city and county of Honolulu and for the counties are real property taxes. Right. So there really are there are three things, I think, for city and county. You're looking at the transient accommodations tax, and that's the state giving a share of like the hotel, basically the hotel tax. Right. The state gives them a share. The second is property taxes, and the last thing is things like fees. And the city doesn't have the counties don't have any power to raise taxes themselves. Right. So that was part of what we needed to educate people on when we were talking about the rail, is the city doesn't actually have any power whatsoever unless the state authorizes their ability to continue the GET for the rail. So that was what the state was actually doing. We weren't raising the tax. We were giving the city the decision themselves. But, we talked earlier, and maybe we should spend a moment on this, whether or not people were or for or against the rail in the first place. Right. It got to a point where it's happening. Yeah. And so right now, for some to, strut around and say, well, we're going to cut off the funding is not really possible. No. I mean, they can say all they want, but in the bottom line is somebody's got to approve something because the project is being built. Right. And my sense of it is we need to give the city whatever tools they need to make the best informed decision, right? So they could have decided we're not going to increase the tax. We don't need it. We don't need the extension. They decided to extend it, though. Well, what about this? The feds have given us a substantial amount of money already. If the state of Hawaii or the city and county and then the state pulls the plug on this project, wouldn't the Fed say, you know what? Guess what you have to do? You have to give us that money back. Oh yeah, no, we're gonna and the chances are we're gonna have to raise taxes to do that. That's what's unfortunate. The city, I shouldn't say we, the city would have to raise taxes. You said something earlier that's important. I just mentioned earlier. You and I were watching a survey, and we are the number 2 place in the country. Behind New York. So it's not as though we are a ready source of funds. We're wait a minute. I normally don't do this, but please ask Beth about the increase in real estate value. Okay, I normally don't do this, but it's true that sometimes the state is saying to the counties, look, why do you want more money? Your property tax is where you're getting your money. Right. Property's going through the roof, blah, 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 blah. Right. You don't need money. Yeah, no, and that's, we had one bill or resolution going through the state this year that was saying that we should, asking the city to look at property taxes and to see if it's fair. And, I think that's something worth looking at, but I don't think we should necessarily be increasing it. It's one of the few places that we have low taxes is in our property taxes. So I'm not sure increasing when you compare to like California, you're right. It's one of the few places, and it would be sort of the last break. What about all of the stuff that went by the boards earlier and I want to know if any of it's going to come back. And it's to really get a grip on what we really are expecting and not collecting. There's a lot of people, booking companies, bed and breakfast, and all these places that are making millions and millions of dollars that are under the radar.
Yeah, and my feeling is that we should actually be making sure that everybody's paying their fair share of taxes. So if you're not paying any taxes because you're under the radar, you're working in the cash economy, or you're operating something illegally or whatever, we just don't tax you for whatever reason. Those people should be paying taxes, and so that overall we stop looking at raising taxes on all the current taxpayers, right? We have to expand our tax base.
You mentioned something that, before it's always been, well, we need the more money, so give us the money.
Right.
Instead of saying, all right, when we throw money at something, shouldn't there be an audit responsibility? Now, we're looking at some really serious stuff on that. Tell us what's happening with regards to the selection, maybe a new auditor, what's going on? I mean, what can we expect to be, what's the reality of us really being able to watch our expenditures?
Well, I think the person we're discussing is Les Kondo. We'd be talking, and he's currently in charge of the Ethics Commission, and he has made quite a stir with his posts at the Ethics Commission. He's been very rigorous about making sure everybody adheres to the law. Some legislators feel like he's maybe gone overboard.
I think it's refreshing. I think it's a show me.
Right. So few people have really paid attention to ethics in this state that, maybe we needed somebody like Les Kondo to shake things up. Very few people have paid attention to audits in the state, and maybe he can shake things up there too. Well,
didn't we just take a look at the city level of Dan Grabowskis, who, embattled as he is, he's actually calling this audit a joke.
He is,
and so somewhere in the middle, I guess, lies the reality of it. But doesn't it also, and how do you answer this? All right, there's an audit. You get the audit. And what steps get taken to comply with suggestions of the audit? Sometimes they just go into that Raiders of the Lost Ark catacombs, and you never see these things again.
Right. One of the things that I've appreciated about the current finance chair is every year we have a bill to repeal special funds, whatever kinds of special funds there are, and it's based on what the auditor's reports are. So if the auditor comes out and says this is a useless fund, there's no reason for this to be here, then we'll go in and repeal it. And it's not very often that government repeals stuff, right?
I mean, that's what I'm saying is when something goes in there, it gets shelved and forgotten. It doesn't seem ever to get reversed out.
Right. And the first thing I've ever really seen be affected by an audit are these special funds. We've started actually following the audits and repealing them, which I think is good.
The worry about special funds has been they're pretty special,
Yes.
But there's also another big misunderstanding. And it seems to me that, when you take a look at the audit, whether it be the current situation or going down the road, that it should be at the end of the audit, if we're placing the trust in the people who come up with these things, to interpret it, and then there be a mandatory action based on an audit.
Yeah, that would be. I think that makes a lot of sense. Sometimes there are things that are policy calls. The auditor might say this is a bad idea, but there might be a good reason. But for the most part, we should be following the reports.
There's many people that say there's so many funded things like you talk about, special funds for this, that, and that they're all justifiable. That's why they make it. But then nobody watches how the money is actually being spent. In other words, why is somebody on assisted housing got lots of gold jewelry and driving a fancy SUV? That doesn't make any sense.
Right. And sometimes it's just, they sound really good, right? So one of the ones that we had to repeal said something along the lines of the Children with Disabilities Special Fund. Like, you don't want to get caught repealing that, even though there's no money in it. So it's a lot of times just fancy names.
People say, hey, Beth Fukumoto Chang voted against this. Look what she's done for our kids, against our kids.
Right.
We got more coming up. It's 745, 296 KHNR is the number. One thing we are going to talk about when we come back is that the joint effort, or lack thereof, really trying to solve the homelessness problem, because there's still some bills very much alive on that. And sometimes there are people saying there's not enough communication between the stakeholders. That's what we're going to talk about a little bit when we come back. But right now it's 7:45, and don't forget at 8 o'clock. Okay, Legislative Monday, Beth Fukumoto Chang in the House from the Minority Party. And one of the things we were talking about just before the break. First of all, she did some research on an earlier caller, Beth. The guy he heard that the safety check might be going up to $75, and I'm having a big heart attack hearing that. It looks like we might be lucky. It doesn't look like there's anything really on that right now.
Yeah, no, it looks like there's no bills going through the legislature. So if it is increasing, then it would be the State Department of Transportation that's increasing it, or on some sort of automatic increase or through rules. But it doesn't.
You have to explain that,
okay.
Because let's say the DOT, which administers the safety check program, right? If they need more money, they can make their own decision.
On some things.
Yes.
Yes. So they can increase fees. All the departments have the ability to increase fees. On certain fees, right? Through rulemaking. So they can go through a public hearing, and it's basically like the legislative process. I'm not crazy about it because it's almost like a shadow legislature.
Yeah, I should say.
And nobody really knows about it or pays attention until it's already passed. So that is possible, but it looks like the last time it was increased was in 2013, and state DOT was again announcing it and went through that process.
But when the caller called, it wasn't an increase. It was like, whoa, hang on to your wallets.
300% increase. Yeah.
Okay, let's turn our attention a little bit to some of the things that are still left. There have been tremendous strides and reversals of impact in the homelessness issue. And I do know that it became, I don't want to say fashionable, but mandatory that there be talked about. And it does look like at long last, there is a pretty good working relationship between the city and the state, at least cross our fingers. One big concern was that the people that are doing the sweeps move somebody from a city property and they just move a few feet to the state property. Right. Is that one making progress where a city person doing a sweep can go on a state property to continue the sweep?
There's a little bit more working together that's taking place, but at the end of the day, some of it is that the state needs to pass something similar to the city's sit-lie ban. Yeah. If we're going to really make it so that everybody can work together.
There are people that are extending expertise to some of these folks as to how to evade the law. Yeah. Some people, and they're as well intended as they may be.
Right.
That's really not solving the problem.
No. And I'm not sure a lot of it. I mean, it's arguable, but I think sit-lie bans are not necessarily solving the problem either. You're just moving people around. But ultimately, I think it's a super complex problem, and the governor and the mayor are in this sort of race because they're both up for re-election soon.
Yeah, I was going to say, the interesting thing about this is that need breeds curious, party bedfellows, because it doesn't look like you can argue with some of the rationales used.
Right.
But you have to make it look like, well, it was my idea, not his idea.
Right. And homelessness is such a big issue, I think, for people that if you're the mayor or you're the governor, for somebody like me in the House of Representatives, I don't know that people are going to decide my election based on homelessness, but somebody like the governor, maybe.
Well, when you poll, and you're good at this in your own district, and you do this, everybody else does it as well. You ask if you're considered, okay, name the top 5 things that are bugging you so I can work with and help you, right?
Right.
And this homelessness may not have even been on the radar for certain areas back in the day.
Yeah, it hadn't been. This is the first year that it really, I've gotten a decent number of calls. And one of my survey questions was, do you support a statewide sit-lie ban? Yeah. And I did not expect it to come back so highly in favor. Yeah. And it has. Yeah.
The other thing is, when you talk about it, if they're not talking about potholes, they're talking about traffic. Yes. It's basic stuff, right?
Usually, yeah. Homelessness is actually a kind of big problem for people to be saying it's one of their top 5, but I think it's starting to affect people's everyday lives.
What about the perception going into this legislative year that you all had with regards to the, quote, rebounding economy, putting money into the coffers, and it's not happened to the degree that we expected? Yeah. We're seemingly doing a little bit better, but it's hard to show that.
Yeah, we are seemingly doing a little bit better. This is the second year we've had to discuss what do we do with a surplus when we have a surplus. So that's nice. But I think one of the things that we're really aware of is that there's a good chance we're coming up on another financial crisis. Yeah. And so making sure that the state is better prepared than we were the last time and putting away a lot of that money.
Remember before when people would say, hey, we have a surplus. What are you doing?
Right.
Spend it.
Right. So
what about save it?
Right. Now we're talking about, should we save it? And one of the interesting things that I debated on Tuesday, what we can do is we can also give it back to taxpayers. Yeah. So this discussion, normally I would say give it back to taxpayers, but we know we're preparing for another financial crisis. I actually support putting it away into a rainy day fund.
That's really a good point, because I think you and I talked about this a year or so ago, and I've talked about it over the years. I remember when Rep. Ward and I talked about this, and a lot of others, is that it sounds really good to somebody running in a district to say, we're going to give you back your money.
Right.
But when you give everybody back, say, $50,
right.
it doesn't do what doing something with that whole amount of money at a different level would do.
Right. $50 once you account for the labor that it costs to process,
right.
the money that it costs to send it back. Once you account for all of those things, you're not going to end up giving back that much money, and it's money that you could have put towards unfunded liabilities or some other economic crisis.
Okay, now I don't take emails.
Yes.
Okay, here's one I'm going to take
okay.
because I think this is not political. This says, "Hi, Mike. I had to file paper returns for Hawaii. I paid my tax liability electronically. Would you believe the state charges you $1 for paying electronically?" And this is from my friend Bernard. I think that's hysterical. I mean, come on, this guy paid. In other words, when you pay the state electronically, that's money. It's not waiting for it's not a check that you have to process. It's ba-bing in the account, right?
Right. The Department of Taxation is unbelievable.
They should be sending us the money. If you pay if you pay electronically, you get a $10 credit.
Yeah.
Because it costs a lot of money, to issue a check.
Yeah, it's a lot of labor.
You mentioned something that was really cool. There was a study. If you're going to send everybody in Hawaii a $50 check, it costs a lot of money.
It does, yeah.
And not just postage.
Yeah. It's not. I mean, it's a little crazy how much it does cost, but the tax department's been working on this thing called tax modernization since I've been elected, and it's things like this that I think really frustrate people. This is in this day and age, it should be very easy to file your taxes. It shouldn't cost you extra money to do it online.
I would think in this day and age, and it's funny because even banks, some people say, well, you get to deposit 3 checks this way and then it's going to cost you. I'm saying, what are you talking about?
Right.
You should be kissing me on the lips. I'm giving you money right away.
Right.
All right, so let's make sure that people understand before we run out of time. The things that are still left on the table that are important are important.
Yes.
So that you reckon, even though, and the bad news is that you can't go on the website and say search bills retaining to road repair and expect to be hearings, because
there won't be hearings.
No more hearings.
Right. And I think the important thing to remember, I know for a few weeks now we've been talking about how boring it was on the House side. We didn't have a lot of good Senate bills. That was because all the interesting bills were with the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
So for the next 2 weeks, there are plenty of interesting bills. There are plenty of bills still alive that are very controversial, including things about water rights and that sort of thing. So THC,
is that, by the way, is the thing on the water rights with A and B and Maui, is that a precedent setter?
It can be. It could be. So lots of big things still alive, and conference will be very interesting. So the next 2 weeks is called conference, and that's what people should do. They should go online, and then they're going to have to call their legislators.
When do you plan on putting out your signs? Because I do know that there's a lot of people that are already complaining about some politicians already having signs out. I mean, it's a ways before the election, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I have I represent a very fortunate district who has a rule against signs everywhere.
Oh, good.
So we don't put up signs, but I have seen a lot going up now. Yeah. I generally the rule is like May or June. It's a little early.
You know that people in our business, in the media, we love election years. We love people got to spend money.
Yes.
They got to they this, they do that.
Yes.
And I do know that maybe you could, as now a quote seasoned veteran, what if there's somebody out there, Beth, no matter what party they're in, and they just say, I've had it. I'm done. I gotta go do something. I want to run for office.
Yeah.
You had it. I mean, it was daunting, isn't it?
It's a lot of work, especially if you start right now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're looking at people have been working on this for a year now.
Yeah.
So if you decide to jump in right now, it's a lot of work. It's possible. I decided in June to run for office when I decided to run. So it's completely possible.
When you ran. Yeah.
When I ran and when I won, I had started in June. So it's possible. But I always say make sure you've talked to somebody that's done it first.
I would think that the most important thing, people ask me all the time, as you know, I've been asked a couple of times to look at the thing, and the number one permission you got to get is from your family.
Oh, yeah. It's so taxing on your family.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for being with us and look forward to seeing you next week. There you go. We got more coming up. It's Prosecutor Monday. That's coming up right after our